Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof, like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business, making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. You seem to be in Sussex, Kieran, are you? Somehow I don't expect you to be, but you're at home.
I am. I've been to Wembley today to give a talk, which was good fun to the students there, and just had a long chat with somebody else connected to London football, and now back to sunny Sussex.
Oh, can you give us any hints as to who that might be, the connection to London football?
I can't, unfortunately. It's all a little bit hush-hush.
All right, I'm going to choose to believe it's Dave Swindlehurst then, ex-Palace centre-forward. Kieran, Saturday afternoon wasn't so good for you, but Saturday evening you had The Cure all over the BBC, and then you went to see Squeeze on Sunday night.
It was an absolutely brilliant weekend music-wise. Obviously, I'm slightly biased, but the Cure album, after a couple of so-so ones, is completely back on form. And Squeeze were just magnificent. I don't know anybody else, apart from Difford and Tilbrook, who can take a person's life and put it into 3 minutes in such an amazing way. They're fantastic musicians as well. And the backing band was great, and everybody had a fantastic time. Has to be said, not many kids there, but then there's a reason for that. It was their 50th anniversary tour.
Holy shit, was it?
Yes.
Oh, my God. Nice blokes, Difford and Tilbrook. I've had an idea, Kieran, before we start. Given the controversy over the weekend and how much publicity it brought to the game of rugby, I think we should start our next pod with a hacker. I think whereby we challenge Swiss Ramble with some kind of dance where we mime unplugging his laptop and deleting all his spreadsheets. See how he copes with that level of pressure before he does.
Or we burn some cuckoo clocks and Toblerone.
Oh, we could do that. That'd be good. I'd watch the hacker. A very good friend of ours, Kieran, our live producer, Julian. He's not a fan of the hacker. Oh my word. Yeah, he called it a legalised death threat, which I think was going a bit far. It's questions day, Kieran. We've got our usual array of good questions and suggestions for getting around FFP. So let's. I love our listeners. I really do. Because one day, Kieran, we're going to get one of these suggestions. And you're going to go, "Oh my God, that's genius!" And then we'll nick it. We'll nick it, patent it, and make loads of money.
So it's Chelsea.
Neil Platts has our first question, and Neil says, and this is a very interesting one. It's one of those questions I like, Kieran, because you think, why have I not thought of this before? As I always say, the figure for breaking profit and sustainability rules is currently £105 million over 3 years. And I believe this figure was introduced back in 2013, 2014, says Neil. Is there any reason this amount has not increased with the inflation rate? Surely since 2014, players' wages, transfer fees, ground maintenance costs, etc. have all increased.
Well, you're absolutely right, Neil, that they have increased, and they have increased significantly as well. I have got the sums for both sets of years, going back to 2013 and also for the most recent season. First of all, some people, I'll just play devil's advocate here, some people will say, surely the limits should be reduced over time and we should be trying to move to an environment in which clubs break even. And I would say, if it was any other industry than football, I might have some sympathy with you. But football clubs are not like, the football industry is not like any other industry. It is an industry where we have many owners who treat clubs like trophy assets. We have, as fans, no real desire for sustainability. What we want is subsidy by somebody very rich. And if they are very rich and they want to subsidise a football club, then why can't they be allowed to do it? If I am a billionaire, I can buy as many yachts as I want, as many helicopters as I want, as many pieces of art as I want. So why can't I run a football club at a loss in the same way as I can run an F1 team at a loss or a stables at a loss? So I do have sympathy for those clubs who have been acquired since 2013 and whose owners have not been allowed to spend as much money as their precedents. But then you have to go back to, why were these rules introduced? And I maintain that the rules were introduced not to create financial sustainability, certainly not to create profitability because it doesn't exist, but to prevent the big six becoming a big seven or a big eight. And that's what we have at present. So in terms of the actual numbers, Neil, this is the position. If the £105 million limit had been index linked in line with revenue of Premier League football clubs, it would today be £249 million. And I think if you were a fan of Everton or Nottingham Forest, you'd be going, so how much would we be deducted in terms of points? And the answer, of course, would be a big fat zero. And also, it would have allowed clubs such as Aston Villa and Newcastle to invest more. And it's very, very clear from the pronouncements that we've seen from their owners, that's what they'd like to do. If the limit had been increased in line with Premier League wages, it would have gone from 105 million to 239, which is broadly the same figure. But the most astounding one, as far as I was concerned, is that if you linked the PSR limit to the increase in transfer fees in terms of players purchased by the Premier League, that £105 million would today be 504, i.e. a club could lose £500 million over 3 years and still be within the limits. So it does seem that some clubs are getting a raw deal. At the same time, you will have the people who want the limits to be lower will say, well, what happens if there's a change of circumstances of the owner? What happens if the owner loses interest or as we saw with Roman Abramovich, has his assets frozen? That's a risk in life. That's a risk in business. Yeah, there's a risk that Sky might decide to go and cancel the Premier League TV deal. And we saw what happened to clubs in the EFL when ITV Digital did that. It doesn't mean that we say to clubs, well, you shouldn't go and spend your money from the TV companies in case the TV companies go bust. So those are the actual numbers. If we increased it in line with general inflation over the course of the period 2013 to 2023, we'd be looking at probably around about 130 million.
How was that figure arrived at in the first place, Kieran, 105 million? Was it a team of experts poring over minute detail, or was it a dart in a board?
There's been no logical justification for how that number was determined. I think initially they tried to keep it relatively close to that of UEFA, but they decided to increase the amount of money that an owner can put in over that 3-year period. So actually, we talk about it being £105 million. It's actually £15 million. But if the owner provides £90 million worth of funding, then you can increase from 15 to 105. But soon, once you start to go into the small print as to that funding, you then end up scratching your head. If you take out a £90 million loan, for example, you would not be allowed to include that £90 million within owner funding. But if you arrange an overdraft, and I'm pretty certain an overdraft has got very, very similar characteristics to that of a loan, i.e. it's from a bank and it has to be repaid, you are allowed to include it, which is, in my view, as somebody that genuinely does not have a dog in the fight, I just find the rules to be completely farcical.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Bernard McCarney. It has the word cricket in it, which would normally disqualify it, Kieran, but I'm a big man, and we've also talked about rugby, and it is basically a football question. But Bernard McCarney says, I'm just wondering if you can provide any insight into the strategy behind Mike Ashley's Fraser Group acquisition of the CBS Arena and the fact they were interested in buying Yorkshire Cricket Club's Headingley Stadium. It seems as though the group are looking to acquire more sporting infrastructure. What would the motivation be, given the large upfront costs associated with these purchases and the lengthy ROI that would come with the leasing of the grounds to the sporting club?
Yeah, I think this is an intriguing question, Bernard. Mike Ashley wanted to buy Derby County Football Club from the administrator. And he was in a position where he could have done that, but the problem was that Pride Park was not owned by Derby County Football Club. And my understanding is that when he tried to negotiate a lease for the stadium, the landlord effectively said, don't like you, Mike Ashley, I'm going to quote you a rent which is so prohibitive as to make you walk away from the football club. Now, that's hearsay. That is something which I've heard from fairly decent sources, but we cannot confirm that. And therefore, Derby County Football Club was sold to somebody else who's done, and I've praised him very often. He's done a fantastic job as the custodian of the club. Mike Ashley got his fingers burnt in doing so, and he decided, well, if I can get my fingers burnt, how about I go and burn somebody else's fingers? So therefore, in the case of the CBS Arena, in respect of Coventry City, where they were playing football, Mike Ashley went and did the same. The arena went into administration. Mike Ashley came up with an offer which was acceptable and is now effectively the landlord as far as Coventry City are concerned. And that has allowed him to dictate terms. What's in it for him? First of all, I think there is a sense of revenge. It's nothing personal in respect of Coventry City, but he's now on the other side of the fence, and is able to see the benefits of doing so. Will he get a return on investment? Well, it's like a buy-to-let purchase. So you talk to any landlord that's done a buy-to-let, and they say, well, we get the money back over a period of time through two areas. First of all, from the rental of the property, and secondly, at some further point in time, should we choose to sell the property, ideally at a profit. Now, whether you manage to do that following the recent budget, I'm not so certain, but that's for a separate pod, I think. So there is a potential financial benefit. I think Mike Ashley managed to acquire the arena at a relatively low price. If we take a look at Yorkshire's finances at Headingley are not great either. They've had a number of distractions, off-field distractions, which have proven to be very expensive as far as the club was concerned. So Mike Ashley, I'm not saying that he's a likable person in any way, shape or form. I think people underestimate just how smart a businessman he is in terms of seeing opportunities to make money. And if you take a look at the history of Mike Ashley, what has he done? He has always been very successful at buying distressed assets. If you take a look at some of the brands which are under his control, the likes of Slazenger and Donnet and so on, they were brands which had fallen upon former glories. He's gone in, bought them at a discount, and is now selling those branded goods in his shops a lot of the time. And he's making money. The people buying the gear are happy because they are getting a branded product as well. So Mike Ashley is a very, very smart businessman in terms of profitability. And I suspect he's seen these opportunities here, effectively acquiring distressed real estate assets from administrators or companies, in the case of Yorkshire, which is in not a great financial shape, as an opportunity to buy low and either rent to get the money back or to sell high.
The budget, Kieran, just as an aside, I was horrified to read during the research notes of Have I Got News For You last week, a story in the Telegraph, which was headlined "Desperate Pensioner Couple Left Bereft by stealing Labour Budget," essentially. The desperate pensioner couple turned out to own 60 buy-to-let properties.
And why can't they buy 60? They're 60 first. It's because of those communists, Kevin. Those communists in the Labour Party and preventing it. And if anybody whose dream, for many of us, a dream is to play professional football or to be backing guitar player for The Cure in concert, or to buy 61 properties to then rent out to others. And they've been prevented from doing so. I've got full sympathy. I'm not a cynic.
Well, see, they were planning to move to Mallorca in 6 months, Kieran. They might have to wait a year. That's how bad it is. Burning someone else's fingers, Kieran, might well look impressive on Uncle Terry's CV. But we know, as you say, Mike Ashley is a smart businessman. That seems a very expensive way of getting a sort of petty, vindictive revenge, doesn't it? Right, I'm going to buy a football club ground to do to them what was potentially being done to me.
I don't think it's not done for revenge. It's nothing personal in relation to Coventry City Football Club. I think he just realised that the separation of football club from football stadium can be very lucrative and very, very beneficial from the perspective of the landlord. So Coventry City, for example, get to the Premier League. For all we know, that there's a very significant rental hike.
Okay.
So he will have, and Mike Ashley, again, I'm people think I'm a Mike Ashley fan. I'm not. If you really want to know what I think of Mike Ashley, go to the Price of Football website, and whilst it's not shown easily, you can find my most recent assessment of Newcastle United's financial statements. And if you take the first letter of every sentence, it's amazing what by pure coincidence it reads.
You're like a medieval monk, Kieran, leaving messages for the future. It's, or there's an easier way if you live in the south of England to find out what Kieran thinks about Mike Ashley, and that's to come to our next live gig in Brighton, which we'll plug at the end of the show. Our next question comes from Adrian Taylor. I think it was an Adrian Taylor who founded When Saturday Comes back in the day. I'm not sure. Unlikely to be the same one, but if it is, well done. Adrian says, given the backlash from all sides to the creation of a European Super League, wouldn't the women's game be in a better position to leapfrog the men and create their own version? There's a larger disparity between the larger and smaller teams in the women's game in terms of crowd sizes and funding, so it looks from the outside easier to unpick.
That's an intriguing viewpoint, Adrian. Nearly all women's teams lose money at present. I was at a presentation less than a week ago when a Premier League chief executive revealed just how much the women's team had cost them over the course of the last decade, and the numbers involved, in also including changes to infrastructure and so on, were quite sizable. The problem with having a Super League, which would be by invitation only, in effect, where you've got guaranteed participants in it every season, is that if you take away meritocracy, so this season, Nottingham Forest currently, was it third in the Premier League?
Fourth at
Fantastic.
the moment. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. It would be great if they qualified for the Champions League, just as it's great, in my view, that Villa are qualified for this season and Newcastle qualified last season. Seeing somebody break in ahead of the same old faces, it's not only good for Nottingham Forest, it gives hope to me and you, and it gives hope to every other fan of a Premier League club or even a Championship club who says, look where Forest were 3 seasons ago. In fact, look where Forest were last season. There's a points deduction for PSR at the arse end of the Premier League, and now they've turned it around. That for me gives people hope. In the women's game, where I think clubs are still trying to build a fan base, if you knew that if your team finished in the top 2 of the WSL and therefore qualified for the Women's European Cup, but you were not going to get into that competition because your team was not one of the chosen few, I think it would be not only very disillusioning for fans. If I was a club owner or a potential club owner, so you've seen what's happened. Palace women's team, they got to the WSL this year. Fair play to them, and they're not finding it easy. And Steve Parish isn't finding it easy. The club's losing money. Why bother? Why bother when the ultimate accolade is making progress, starting to challenge? And the idea of Palace's women's team playing in Europe is something which is not only great for the players, not only great for the fans, but it's great for the owner as well. If that's being taken away because you're going to create a closed shop Super League where only the best 12 teams in Europe play each other on an annual basis, I think that's a smack in the face for everybody who's aspirational. And I also think it would act as a huge disincentive for those owners who are thinking, I'm going to put a wee bit more money, because I've seen that by a relatively small increase in the playing budget, we can certainly go up 2 or 3 or 4 places in the WSL, or we can get promoted from the National League to the Championship, or the Championship, or to the WSL, and so on. So I'm not a fan of Super League, as you know, even though from a financial point of view, it's fantastic if you happen to be part of it. But I don't think it would be good for women's football.
Well, strangely, Steve Parish is going to get a mention in our next question, Kieran, because it comes from Richard Morris. Richard Morris says, I regularly watch Sheffield FC. Now, that will really upset Steve Parish, because Sheffield FC, being officially the oldest still existing football club in the world, is really messing with his plans for Palace to be the oldest still playing football club. It's like a Scooby-Doo. He's got a whole team of historians trying to find a gap between when Sheffield FC started and he's desperately hoping they had a year off so we can become bizarrely the oldest team in the world, to no apparent effect. It's being the second oldest team in the world has done nothing.
It's the Apollo 10 of oldest football teams.
It's done nothing for our profile. There's nothing in the club shop, but it keeps him happy. So when Steve Parish is happy, we're all happy. But Richard says, I regularly watch Sheffield FC and the rugby league team Sheffield Eagles. And last year they announced plans for a new shared stadium to be built in the Meadowhead area of Sheffield. There are some nice drawings of the new stadium, but I don't think any sources of funding have been announced. My question is, from what potential sources could they apply for grants or interest-free, low-cost loans? How much could they hope to help fund this project?
Right. So in terms of this particular stadium, we're talking about a 5,000 capacity stadium. There has been a proposal put forward by Sheffield FC in respect of this. I think it's also fair to say there has been a public meeting and feedback was mixed. There are some people saying, yeah, it's great. There's some local residents saying traffic around the area is already rubbish. It would make it worse. And they would say that. I'm as somebody that's been through the trials of moving to a new stadium, I've seen the nature of objections from local people. In respect of funding, I think this would have to be some form of private-public partnership. There is a levelling up fund. If it was created as a multi-function, multi-sport stadium, then it could be justified on the grounds of improvement to community health, both physical and mental, in terms of improvements to community education, because you would have to set it up in such a way that it could be utilised for more than just sports matches. You have meeting rooms, conference rooms, and so on. And therefore, the local council might see if they've got a stake in it, they can get a return on their investment and so on. So there is lottery funding, there is issues in terms of you can't get grants from the EU these days. I can't remember why.
Hang on.
Probably those dams. Probably Rachel Reeves.
Yeah,
she stopped us from getting EU funding.
It'll be Rachel Reeves.
As the spawn of the Hazel Pub, according to certain newspapers, it's her fault. So there are grants available. There is lottery funding available if it can be proven that it's for a community basis. There could be funding from central government in terms of levelling up. I think you have to be a little bit careful with regards to that, because I'm a great believer that the levelling up funds should be used for something which can generate or benefit people 365 days a year, as opposed to just sports days. But by having a 4G pitch, and I've seen some of the non-league 4G pitches, and going along to those in the evening when matches aren't taking place, and seeing girls football and seniors football and kids football taking place because you can utilise the pitch 7 days a week, I think has huge benefit. So it would be along those routes. I don't think the club itself has the resources to fund this.
The Levelling Up Fund, Kieran, would Manchester United have access to that for Old Trafford?
Not for Old Trafford, no, because the only beneficiaries to any change of the football stadium would be to a private company, which is registered in the Cayman Islands, part owned by a company in the Isle of Man, and traded in New York with majority owners in Florida. I think it would fail. But as far as providing funding for the surrounding area, because if you're going to have a 100,000-seater stadium, then you've got to have transport links and you've got to have other infrastructure investment in the surrounding area, which can deal with 100,000 people visiting that particular area on a regular basis. And I don't hide back. I loathe Ineos and their behaviour since acquiring the club, but we have seen other football clubs who have moved to new stadiums have had some benefit from central or local government investment and spending in the surrounding area, but not the football club stadium itself.
James Duke has an interesting take on what has become a hot topic conversation recently, Kieran, which is lucky because James would have sent this question in about a year ago. And it's become topical. That's how it works on this show. Kieran has mentioned previously, says James Duke, that since 2021, all club sponsorship deals over £1 million are scrutinised by the Premier League to determine if they are at fair value, and only the fair value amount will be recognised for FFP purposes. However, have certain clubs, open brackets, i.e. Man City and Newcastle, close brackets, received overinflated sponsorship deals not to be FFP, but instead to improve their cash flow position. This would allow them to offer more favourable payment terms when bidding against other clubs for players by offering a greater upfront payment. From my understanding, FFP only looks at player amortisation and not the payment terms between clubs.
Right. This is an intriguing question, James. In the case of Newcastle United, they have improved their cash flow position, but not through sponsorship arrangements. They have instead put money in via the owners in the form of new shares. So that has given them cash. Now, not all, in a similar outcome to James's suggestion that would this therefore allow the club to put more cash into a deal? Yes, it would. So, and for people not quite certain of what we're talking about here, let's say that you sign a player for £50 million. Normally, you'd pay in 3 instalments. So you might pay 20, 20 followed by 10. If Newcastle's owners put a load of cash in, they could go in and say, well, we can give you £50 million up front. And they're more likely to get the selling club to agree to the deal. So that would be a benefit for those clubs, even though not all of the money from owners does count towards PSR or FFP calculations. So I understand where he's coming from, but there is no motivation on my analysis of clubs signing into agreements which are overinflated, and that's not been proven by anybody as yet, I hasten to add, but just to improve their cash flow in terms of ability to spend on other things.
Now, Kieran, I need you to hold your wrist out here, either physically or metaphorically, because you're going to get a light slap on it.
Oh.
As Guy Watson says, this made me laugh when I saw it. Guy Watson says, I'm holding you entirely to blame for the following email. And I think he means you, Kieran, not me. I don't remember having said any of these things. So, Guy, I'm blameless in this, Guy, as quite often in life. It's Kieran. Kieran did it. Since listening to the pod, I've taken a keen interest in the finances of my club, Altrincham AFC, and have sadly registered for notifications from Companies House. No, don't say sadly, guys. Own it. Proudly registered for notifications from Companies House. Hold that certificate up so the world can see it. I received an email last year, says Guy, from Companies House, which talked about a share issuance, but I don't understand what this actually represents. Does a share issuance encourage fans to purchase shares at a specific time? And is this money then pumped into the club? Are shares freely available to buy today? And if so, where are they floated? And what is the share value? And it's an interesting question, Guy, Kieran, because we do talk quite a lot. I mean, we've got a news story coming up on Thursday about loans being transferred to shares. We talk about this quite often. I don't often understand fully what the different share issues mean. And that question there, can you buy shares any day, I think is a really interesting one.
It is. There are two types of company that broadly issue shares. There are firstly what we refer to as public listed companies. And these companies have their shares traded on a recognised stock exchange. So therefore, Manchester United have their shares traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Celtic PLC have their shares traded on what we call the alternative investments market. And if you want to buy or sell shares in those companies, all that you do is go onto your app and you say, I want to buy or I want to sell, and a deal is put through. So you can get immediate cash in or out as a result of that transaction. Those type of share circumstances are relatively rare. We did have a rush to the stock markets in the late 80s and early 90s. So Spurs were listed, for example. I think Terry Venables was involved with that. And then we saw Millwall and Sheffield United and Hearts and quite a few clubs decide to go to market. And then they realise, actually, this isn't perhaps a very good idea. Because first of all, you have what we refer to as compliance costs. If you want to be traded on the stock exchange, then you've got to follow the stock exchange book of rules, which is far more onerous than it is for just being a bog standard club elsewhere. So it meant that your admin costs, your compliance costs started going up. And then shareholders were saying, well, okay, we're buying shares in your football club. We want some form of return. So the shareholders had greater scrutiny. The shareholders might have a more negative view of clubs spending money, because every pound you go and spend on a player, every pound you spend on wages is £1 less that's going into the potential profit pot, which could be then distributed to shareholders in the form of a dividend or increase the value of a club. So that was what we refer to as a public limited company. Now, the vast majority of football clubs, as indeed the vast majority of companies full stop, are what's known as private limited companies. So if you take CPFC 2010 Limited, and if it says limited as opposed to PLC, it means it's a private limited company. There is a limited number of shares available, and they are privately owned. The only way that I can buy Steve Parish's shares is if I approach him and say, I'd like to offer you so much for your shares. But the problem is, how do we know what the shares are worth? For Manchester United, you've got the New York Stock Exchange, which is saying this is today's price because we've had so many being bought, so many being sold, and people have agreed a price. If I want to buy Steve Parish's shares, or if you want to buy Steve Parish's shares, how do you know how much they're worth? And there's also a fair chance that there is something called preemption rights in relation to those shares. And what a preemption right means is that if you approach Kevin, if you approach Steve Parish and say, I want to offer you, £100 million for your shares, he first of all has to go to Donna and Blitzen and Texter or whoever it is and say, look, Kevin's offered me £100 million. You've got right of reply. If you match that price, you're entitled to buy the shares at that price. Otherwise, I'm going to sell to Kevin. So it's far more difficult to buy shares as far as a private company is concerned, especially when you've only got 2 or 3 shareholders. Now, going back to Guy's question, and relating it directly to Altrincham Football Club, Altrincham have had 2 share issues in the past year. Now, what a share issue is, it's where the football club says, we need some cash, we're going to effectively put part of the club up for sale, and we're going to give you pieces of paper, which are called share certificates, in exchange for you giving us cash. And I think Altrincham have issued around about 24,900 shares over the course of the last year. I think that's raised around, I've done my calculations correctly, and I have been busy scribbling whilst we've been having this conversation. I think it's raised about £1.7 million. Now, if you go to something called a confirmation statement, which is a spectacularly dull piece of paper, which has to be updated each year, and you can pick that up from Companies House, and I'm sure Guy has done this, it actually lists out everybody who owns shares in Altrincham Football Club. Now, it's not like Palace, where you've got 3 or 4 shareholders. There's actually quite a few. We're talking dozens and dozens. So in theory, what Guy could do is he could approach one of the people on this list of shareholders and say, I see you own 1,000 shares. Could we have a conversation and come up with a price? But what is the price? It's a bit like if you did a painting, how much is that painting worth? Because it's a unique piece of art from Kevin Day. So there's no market price for it as such. So you'd probably have to try to work out what you consider to be a fair value for it.
I'm glad you clarified that it was scribbling you were doing, because I've only got a limited view of the screen. I could see something happening, so I think it's like watching Catchphrase back in the 80s. The trouble with me approaching Steve Parish is very difficult, as he tends to scuttle off if he sees me anywhere in the vicinity. Millwall at one stage, I believe, Kieran, issued millions of shares, didn't they?
They did. And it was a relatively short-lived experiment. But just like many things, it was faddish. Remember we used to talk about NFTs in football 2 years ago, practically non-stop. And now, we said at the time, they're magic beans of no inherent value. And if you want to go and buy them, fill your boots, it'll be worthless in 6 months' time. Now that that's proven to be the case, it's never mentioned.
And I believe I recall you telling me, Kieran, that the trouble for clubs like Millwall, and again, there's no indication of any wrongdoing, but the level of scrutiny that comes with being a listed company is much higher than from being a private company, I understand. Is that right?
It is, because you've got to comply with the stock exchange regulations, that they are far more onerous. Most private companies, most private football clubs are run very well. We both exchange, when we finished recording the show, the tales of the ones which are not run particularly well, the ones that we can't publish on air. So, but for a private company, the scrutiny is only really coming from the other members of the board, or perhaps shareholders who do own a small number of shares, who can raise questions at the annual general meeting, but they don't have the same scope in terms of registering dissent or having a code of governance in terms of things such as non-executive directors. Non-executive director, for those people not familiar with the phrase, you're there as a critical friend. You're there to to hold the board to account effectively on behalf of shareholders.
Oh, we've got a story about the board at Shrewsbury as well coming up on Thursday. Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Martin G, and that's G-E-E, not Martin G as in some kind of middle-aged rapper.
Gina.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Gina G. I forgot Gina. Apologies to Martin if he's A rapper, and B, not middle-aged, but there you are. Martin says, I remember a few months ago you saying that only 2 clubs in the Premier League made an accounting profit last season before adding transfer income, West Ham being one of them. How come more clubs in the Premier League haven't made an account profit before addition of transfer income?
Because football is like no other industry.
Right, okay.
Yeah, let's face it, we wouldn't be doing this podcast if it
definitely.
was the same as selling groceries.
Yeah.
The price of beans would have died on its arse within a couple of episodes. As it has to be said,
not in Panto,
what we expected to be the case for this.
Yeah, not in Panto. The price of beans is a very important subject in Panto.
Oh, yeah, true. So the reason why Premier League clubs still make losses before transfer fees is as simple as this. Since the commencement of the Premier League, revenues have increased by 3,000%. Big round of applause. But we have this smug saying in the world of finance: revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and profit is revenue less costs. If your revenues rise by 3,000%, but your wages increase by 3,800% in the same period, the chances are you're going to make a loss. And then you've got to ask yourself, well, why are clubs paying this level of wage? It's as simple as this. Football is a talent industry. Talent follows the money. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It works I can assure you, it works in the world of finance. It works in the world of entertainment, as you know yourself. So it's just like any other business, except because you are very much at the rarefied elite end of the spectrum, to get a 1% increase in ability in terms of performance, the chances are you're going to have to go and pay 10% higher wages. And once you've got that player who's proven himself to be of a higher level, your fear is that somebody's going to try to snatch that player from you. You've only got to look at Chelsea and Cole Palmer. Brilliant signing for Chelsea. They put him on an 8-year contract. Within 12 months, other clubs were sniffing around, despite the fact that he was on an 8-year contract, and they thought they'd have protection. So what did Chelsea do? They gave him an extra 2 years on his contract, and they gave him a massive pay rise, because in terms of contracts, and again, I was at a presentation last week by a club executive. He says 5-year contracts are fine unless the player doesn't want to play for you for 5 years, and the players do hold a degree of power here in terms of their position in the market. So the reason why clubs are losing money, I mentioned earlier at the start of the show just how fast transfer fees have grown. Transfer fees have gone up faster than revenues. Wages have gone up faster than revenues. So if your 2 main costs in the sport, which are transfer fees and wages, if they've gone up higher than the money coming into clubs, the chances are that clubs are going to lose money. You then say, well, how can that be sustainable? And it's sustainable because we have this trophy asset model operating in football, in where many owners are willing to subsidise losses. And if you're willing to subsidise losses, then you end up with the wage levels and the loss levels that we have today.
What a player Cole Palmer is, isn't he?
Yeah.
And also, the reason I love him even more is he's so surly in post-match interviews. He's just hilariously surly, to the point where you think he's doing that deliberate. I mean, he makes Michael Elise look like Oscar Wilde. He just really... There was one of the post-match interviews said that something he'd done reminded him of Gianfranco Zola. He went, I never saw him play, but he's on FIFA. That was just like, hats off, young man. Gareth Beanie has our last question, and it takes us to Wales. And Gareth says, hearing you all delve into the depths of English non-league with the story about Nuneaton Borough and your regular discussions about smaller Scottish clubs, I was wondering if you've ever taken a look at the finances of Welsh Premier League clubs. In recent years, we've lost big, in Welsh domestic terms, teams such as Bangor City and Rhyl, while TNS remain the only full professional club pretty much surviving off a rich benefactor. Are there any more clubs at financial risk or too reliant on UEFA qualification round money? I'd also love to hear you both try to pronounce some of the Welsh club names. Well, I'll start. Cardiff. Or Cardiff. Paint the Dark and the Mars Bar. Llandudno. We all know my pronunciation of Llandudno is perfect because that's where Ali was brought up. So there you are. Newport. Over to you, Kieran. It's a good question, Kieran. It is
a fair question as well.
It's a long old question, so perhaps we could praise it a little.
Yes, as far as the finances of Welsh Premier League clubs, or the Cymru Premier, as it is known, yes, there have been losses, and when we that very fact that we have spoken to people from Llandudno is indicative of the challenges facing individual clubs. In the main, the clubs tend to wash their own face because it is far too high a risk to try to budget for a UEFA qualification, especially given a lot of the historical dominance that we've had in respect of TNS in recent years. And also congratulations to them for winning one of their matches. I think it was in the Europa Conference. Fantastic achievement and getting as far as they've done. So what we're seeing in terms of other clubs is they're broadly breaking even. What I mean by broadly breaking even is that they might make a wee loss one season, and then the following season they'll make a small profit. So over sort of a rolling period, they're not making money, but the losses are relatively low, simply because they don't have the benefactors. They cannot match TNS in terms of being able to lose a substantial amount of money each year. And on the back of that, have a more competitive playing budget. And this is, again, similar to what we see in Scotland when we were talking about Rangers' losses on the show on Thursday. But in the main, most Scottish clubs tend to run a fairly tight model because, going back to what we were talking about earlier and competitiveness, the competitiveness in terms of winning the Scottish Premiership is very, very limited. And the gaps between the Premiership and the Championship and the Championship in League One and League Two are relatively low. So there's no incentive to try to buy your way out of the division. Although getting out of the Championship in the knowledge that you've got Rangers and Celtic coming to town to visit your ground the following season has led to a slight uptick in the level of losses in that division.
Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. It's very kind of you. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, it will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. Go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. We did jump the gun a little bit without me promising you the new announcement soon, but they will be here within the next week or so once producer Guy has done his magic business wand waving. That's sounds worse than I meant it to sound. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and you can find us on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to buy our book, which is just out in paperback, you can pop yourself down to a bookshop, an independent one hopefully, or you can find details on our website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday. We seem to have trailed half the stories on that news pod already, Kieran. But in the meantime,
teasing, I think.
Teasing, good, well done, teasing. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as Kevin mentioned there, we are hosting a live show on Friday week, Friday the 15th of November at Brighton Utilitarian Church. That is purely for the benefit of Brighton Samaritans. The nights are drawing in, times are tough. There's more and more people using the service of Samaritans. So we had a chat, and what can we do? It's Movember as well. There's a lot of people, men and women, has to be said, men and women going through really hard times. And what the Samaritans do in trying to provide an ear. And it's amazing how many people don't have an ear to talk to. in terms of the challenges that they're facing. We felt that we could do this. So if you go on to either the show notes from the podcast, or if you go to Eventbrite and put in price of football, you can get a tickets there. It's a good show. You'll be getting more than 90 minutes in terms of entertainment. We're hoping to confirm a guest in the next few days as well. We're just in negotiations with somebody. But even so, even if you don't, you'll have a good evening out. It's an international break weekend, so you're not missing out on any football in terms of other considerations, and you'll be helping a great cause as well. If you want to help the show in a slightly different manner, yes, there is Patreon, but alternatively, you could give us a review. And in keeping with our love of Welsh football, you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Bonnie Tyler and Max Boyce. And I'm not sure about the talking, but the singing would be fantastic.
I can't tell you Bonnie Tyler. I'm sorry, I was just going in my head whether I can tell you Bonnie Tyler. I can't tell you. I was, in fact, only saying to Ali yesterday, one of my abiding memories is being at Swansea when they were back in the Premier League for the first time, and Max Boyce leading the singing pre-match. My God, it's proper hairs on the back of the head stuff. Bonnie Tyler raises the hairs on the back of the head for a different reason. What I will say, wonderful. It's a very small list of people. I've never go out drinking with Paul Weller. I would add Bonnie Tyler to that list. Seriously, she left it's carnage, Kieran. That's all I can say. Yeah, there's only so many times you can sing that song in different all-bar ones across London before. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.